and located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Now, there's very few things more important than emotional intelligence. You know, the number one skill, as I see, as effective leadership is the ability to understand how you relate to other people. It doesn't matter how many diplomas you have on your wall. It doesn't matter how much education you have. But if you don't have emotional intelligence, if you don't understand yourself and as well how you relate to other people, your leadership skills is not going to be as effective as they could be. The good news, you can improve your emotional intelligence through learning and using an assessment that we'll talk about here at the end of the class. And without further ado, I want to introduce Jennifer Zemecki, who's a partner of mine. I've known her for over 10 years. She's the founder and president of Well Run Concepts Incorporated, a human resource consulting firm founded in 1997, whose mission is job matching and developing top talent. Jennifer has over 25 years of human resource management experience. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Organizational Communication from Arizona State University and is a certified professional behavioral analyst, a values analyst, a DNA analyst, and also certified in the TriMetrics assessment. She holds other certifications in other areas and assessments and is a good friend of mine and a true outstanding professional. So Jennifer, take it away from here.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's great to be with all of you today. And one quick announcement, you can see on your toolbar there is a handout. So you're welcome to right there click on it from your toolbar. You can download it, you can view it. And for those of you who don't see it, I'll just give you 5 points you want to think about today during the presentation that has to do with your EQ. So first of all, you want to know, why do you need to know your EQ? What are going to be the benefits of increasing your EQ? How can I use my EQ? How can I increase my EQ? And how could I or my team benefit from increasing their EQ? So those are some questions that we want to answer by the end of today. And first, let's get into what is EQ. So why should we even be studying this topic? And thank you for joining us today to learn about why do I care about my EQ? Well, here's some reasons. Because low EQ in the workplace is costing you. And here are the 4 points we're going to address today. So this is our agenda. You know, you might be saying, why EQ? Well, I can tell you that there's a lot of smart people out there that may be derailing their career due to low emotional intelligence. Another reason is because our emotions drive our actions. And I'm not only talking about DISC, our behavioral style here, I'm talking about our reactions. And we need to understand what is emotional intelligence and what is your EQ. How does the EQ work? Well, we're going to get into the model. We're going to get into the 5 factors that make up that model. And how is the EQ used in the workplace? Well, I want you to walk away with at least 3 tips or insights that you can apply today that is going to help you. Because I will tell you, EQ is costing your team in productivity, in sales, in personal motivation, in collaboration, and teamwork. So let's look a little deeper into what is underneath the surface. What's under this iceberg? Well, our traditional focus has been more at what's above the surface. We've been looking at our personal motivators for years. We've been looking at our competencies. We've been looking at our DISC or our behavioral style. And these are definitely necessities for top performance. But what we have found in the last 20 years of studying EQ is it is not sufficient. We need to go under the surface. We need to look at these 5 factors that make up the EQ: the self-awareness, the self-regulation, the motivation, the empathy, and the social skills. Because what we have found is this is what's required for long-term success. Now, I want each of you to think about some people you've worked with through the years, and I'm sure you can come up with more than one person that you've known who was highly technically skilled, probably also had a very high IQ, but they failed in their job. Well, it might have to do with them having a low EQ. So think about that for a moment. Now, why EQ? Well, EQ has come about in the last 20 years or so, and that's why we've started studying it, is because there is a rapid change and there is a global workforce. So do any of you feel these changes today? The lack of consistency, the speed of change that we're having to go through, lightning fast. There's an increase in uncertainty. These are all reasons that have led to EQ being more and more important in the workplace. And what we found is EQ improves predictions of how people will react in different situations. So that's kind of a definition, if you will, and I want you to think about that. And do any of you care about knowing that? Do you care about knowing how you may be predicting reactions in the workplace or how others might be? Well, let's take a look at how EQ works. First of all, at a very core level, there's an emotion. So that's what comes first. We're human beings, and the first thing that happens is we have an emotion. The emotion happens first, not a thought. A lot of people think, well, the thought comes first. Emotion first, then the thought. That's the cognition. Then a behavior occurs, and I'm not talking about the DISC model here, how we carry it out, the how. I'm talking about a physical reaction. That's the behavior. Then next, hopefully we have some skills. That's the competency. And then we get to the outcome. And the outcome is it going to be superior performance? Is it going to be a good decision? Or is it going to be not such a good decision? A poor decision, not top performance. That's kind of the core of how the EQ model works. And here's a definition from Cooper. Let me read this. It's kind of meaty, so chew on this one. Emotional intelligence is the ability to sense, understand, and effectively apply the power and acumen of emotions to facilitate high levels of collaboration and productivity. Okay, you might want to read that again. And what I've come to understand about EQ after 20 years is it's really your ability to apply your emotions, either positively or negatively, for outcomes. So why don't you pause for a second. If you've got your handout, write it down or think about, what does EQ mean to you? Look at the definition, think about it, and then we'll move forward. Okay, here's some stats on EQ. Well, in 1995, Daniel Goleman wrote an outstanding book, and he brought the whole world of EQ out of academia and into the business world. So he didn't invent emotional intelligence, but his book was so successful, and he's written many after it that are all very good. If you're looking for resources on studying EQ, all of his books are really worth reading. But he really brought this whole EQ phenomenon to the forefront. And one of his quotes from the book is, 90% of the difference between star performers and average performers in senior leadership is EQ. And I will tell you, I've been coaching senior executives for over 20 years, and I can validate that statistic. Most of the time that they end up in coaching with me, it is not a behavioral issue. It's not a DISC issue. It's not a motivation issue. It's certainly not a technical issue. It's not an issue of that they're not smart enough, they didn't go to college. It's none of that. It usually ends up being an EQ issue. And here's some more research for you. We're born predominantly, as you probably know, with your IQ. It's pretty much, mostly set at birth, but it can increase or fluctuate a little bit by childhood. But by the time you become a young adult, it's really locked in. Well, your IQ is only 10 to 25% of your success. That's actually rather low. 10 to 25% of success is actually measured by the IQ. Whereas they have found EQ is between 25 and 75% of the success in your job. So it really isn't studying EQ. It kind of started out as, oh, is this a nice thing to talk about? It's really becoming a must. I'm really moving EQ way up the list on must-dos because it's very important that, especially in leadership positions, they are focused on, they are developing their EQ. Okay. Long time ago, if you want to look up this cover story by Nancy Gibbs, it was in the October issue of Time in 1995, and this is, again, kind of bringing EQ into the modern day. There's also a really legendary study. Some of you probably remember it. It was called the Marshmallow Experiment. And we've got a YouTube video on our website if you want to take a look at it. It's really cute. But what it was the scientists decided to put 4-year-olds in a room, one by one, sit them down at a desk, kind of look like a school setting, and they gave them one marshmallow. Then they left the room for 15 to 20 minutes. They videoed what the children did during that time. And the point of it was they said, well, you can eat this marshmallow now, but if you don't eat the marshmallow, by the time I come back, you'll get another one. So you can have 2 marshmallows. Well, the video is hilarious because it shows all the antics that the kids went through to try to not eat the marshmallow. Well, as you can imagine, a 4-year-old, some of them ate the marshmallow the minute they walked out the door. Some of them waited. They tried their best, but after 5 minutes, they caved in. But some 4-year-olds actually made it for 20 minutes to get that second marshmallow. Well, what do we call that today? Well, self-control, delaying gratification. And that's one of the keys in emotional intelligence is self-regulation. Well, what was really fascinating about the study was not just that. They followed around these children for the next 22 years. And they found out that the ones who could delay gratification when they were 4, i.e. emotional intelligence, using self-control, self-regulation, they were the most successful in their life. And the measurements of success were not just, how much money did they make, what kind of job did they have. They measured happiness. They did a lot of measurements. So that's quite a remarkable study that brings to the forefront the need for development of emotional intelligence. Like I said, the IQ is pretty much set at birth. You can't really do too much about that, but we are all born with 0% EQ. We do need to develop it through our lives. It does show that in general, some of the statistics show that as you age, your EQ increases, but that's not necessarily so because I know some young people that have very high EQ and I know some older people who have very low EQ. The point is we have to be aware of it and we have to have actionable items to increase our EQ. Now, some of you may be wondering, is this EQ assessment valid? Well, yes, it is. The tools that we use, Greg and I use, are all validated. So if you're interested in that technical report, you can find that on our website, but they are validated for development. So that's important to remember. They are not yet validated for selection. I think we will see that in the future, so now we can't use these in pre-employment or in screening, but what we do suggest is once you have hired them, that you certainly bring that into play in the onboarding process. Okay, let's get into how the EQ works and what is the model that we use. This is the 5-factor model that we use. If you notice on the top half of the wheel, there's 3 self-factors. These are the intrapersonal, and that's the self-awareness, that's the self-regulation that I was just speaking of, and that's motivation. On the bottom half of the wheel are our other factors, and those have to do with other people, interpersonal, and then we'll be looking at empathy and social skills. So let's start at the top left. That's where we begin, and as we go through this model, I want you to get right from the start, we always begin with self-awareness. You will not be successful if you say, hey, I'm going to jump in the middle of the model and I'm just going to work on my motivation, for example. It all begins with self-awareness. And what does that mean? That's the ability to recognize and understand your moods, your emotions, and drives, but more importantly, how they affect other people. And that's where some people really miss it. They may feel and understand their emotions, but they have not a clue how it's affecting other people. That's the key here. That's what we're looking at. Now, as we move around to the top right, we see the ability to control or redirect our disruptive impulses, our moods, the propensity to suspend judgment, and think before acting. This is what I was referring to in the marshmallow experiment. This is self-regulation, i.e. self-control. Do you know somebody, or are you one of those blurters, the blurter syndrome that can't help themselves? They blurt things out before they think about it? Well, that falls under this category, self-regulation, the ability to control one's impulses. Now we move around, we get into motivation. And this is not the personal engagement motivation. This is an intrinsic factor. This is a passion to work for reasons that go beyond money and status, and a propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. This is measuring resilience. That's what this is, the resiliency factor. So it's the old question. You know, if you won the Powerball today, would you keep working in your current job? Would you change job and work in something that you love? Would you work at all? That's in this category under motivation. And it's the emotional component of working. Now, when we move around to our interpersonal, we come up with empathy. And empathy here is not where we're valuing humans. This is where we have the ability to understand. Understand is the key word here, of the emotional makeup of other people. This is our ability to see the world through their other eyes, through their eyes. This is to walk in their shoes. And I mean emotionally putting yourself in their shoes. I'm not talking about intellectually thinking about it and saying, oh, you know, seeing those homeless people, oh, that, you know, that's a bad thing. No, are you there? Are you feeling what they would be feeling? That is what we're talking about in empathy. And when we bring it around, we get to the last one, social skills, which is a proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. This is where you end up. And I talked about what is EQ costing you. Well, I'll tell you, if you've got low social skills, or your organization does, we've got a lot of self-promoters, we've got a lot of people running around, what's in it for me? This is not highly collaborative. This is not team-oriented. That is what a high EQ looks like in social skills. They're able to say yes and no gracefully. Okay, so let's keep moving with our model here. Again, if you think about starting at the bottom with awareness, this is, again, if you go to the left, the me side is how am I feeling. The right side, the other side, is how did they feel? And then we move up into action. The right side, the me, is how did I react? Or on the right side, it's how did they react, or what did I see? Now, right now, I wanted you to kind of take your emotional temperature. And this is something to get in the habit of because it's very effective. Think of yourself right now and how you're feeling, and think of yourself as a glass of water. If the water is crystal clear, then you're probably in a very calm emotional state, and probably you're thinking very clearly, and you'll probably be making good decisions in this moment. But if your glass of water is rather cloudy, kind of like it just came out of the tap, and you know it's kind of murky, that's you full of emotion. And when you're in that murky state, you are not going to be making the best emotional decisions. You're not going to be making the best decisions because they will be emotionally based. So as we go through this and as you go through your day, you're going to want to get in the habit of taking what we call your EQ temperature. Okay, let's continue with the model and let's overlay our 5 factors now that we learned from the wheel, and let's put them into this flow chart. So again, you're going to start at the bottom left with self-awareness. Okay, how am I feeling? Now, what we know is that there is a positive correlation between high self-esteem and high self-awareness. What does that mean? That means a high self-esteem equals a high self-awareness. It also means that you cannot have a high self-esteem if you have a low self-awareness. So people love to talk about self-esteem and all that. Well, they need to begin with self-awareness. Okay, now we move up the model to self-regulation. This is a skill that we need to learn. Again, I mentioned we're not born with self-regulation. We're not born with the ability to control ourselves. Okay, that's something we need to develop. It's called self-management. So it's a skill, learning how to control your reactions. And now as we move through the motivation, kind of through the center of our flow chart here, this is where we move from ourself outward to others. And we land over there at the bottom right, which is our empathy. This is our social awareness. How is what I'm doing impacting others? Something that some people may never think of. Well, if we want to end up with high social skills, which is our social management skills, we want to have positive outcomes, then that's what we need to think about. What am I experiencing from them? Okay, how is this playing back to me? How is this played out? Okay, the last way to look at it is kind of this flow chart. Follow the green. The green takes you through the path I just talked about. A lot of people try to start over there with the red. They try to start and they say, I'm going to increase my social skills, or I'm going to increase my empathy. And they try to go about it, and it just doesn't work. If you want to get to the end game, which is high productivity, high teamwork, high collaboration, it doesn't start there. It starts back with self-awareness. Empathy, how do you get there? Learn how to really listen. And I mean really listen. Not hearing the words, not thinking about what you're going to say when they're done talking in a meeting. I'm talking about, wow, closing your mouth and really taking in how are they feeling. And how do you show that back to them? How do you mirror that? And with self-regulation, what we're going to realize, and what we talk about a lot when we do exercises in our certification program, is what are our enablers and our disablers. So how are we going to control ourselves? Well, we've got to have a plan. We've got to have enablers to help us do that. You know, a very easy way that, you know, we teach children to do is count to 10. You know, don't respond until you count to 10. You know, think about it. Breathe. Maybe you have a little mantra you say in your head. You have a motto. Maybe you need to listen to some music before you reply to that email or take that phone call. These are what we call self-regulation or self-management techniques so that we can control ourselves and have positive outcomes. You also need to learn what are your disablers. Your disablers are things that are going to prevent you from being in control, such as speaking before thinking, having poor habits. If you're in poor health or you have a lack of sleep, this is greatly going to damper your ability to control yourself. That's why we call them disablers. And also, as we go through the model, there are 7 basic emotions. Can you name them? Right now, try to write them down on your handout. There's 7. See if you can come up with all 7. I'll give you a hint. There's only 2 positive emotions. To me, that's rather depressing. There's only 2 positive ones and there's 5 negative ones. And what we've learned through studying EQ is for every bad or negative emotion we feel, we need about 4 positive ones to overcome that. Well, that's pretty tough because we've got 5 negative ones coming at us and we only have 2 positive ones. So you can do the math and figure out that this is a pretty tough battle. So you need to be aware of what they are. So the 2 positive ones, they should be easy. Love and joy. The 5 negative ones is where a lot of people hang out. They spend a lot of their life in fear, anger, maybe even hatred, sadness, that's a big one, and envy. So hopefully you grabbed those 7 emotions and wrote those down. Now let's get into the performance wheel. Again, why are we studying EQ? Well, if we look here, behaviors is on the outer side of the wheel. It's easy to see our behaviors. Remember, if you've been around Greg and doing your DISC studying, you know all about DISC, and that's how you see the world, how you carry out your job. Well, then we also look at acumen. That's a layer below it. Personal skills. That's skills, competencies. Then you have your experiences. We're going deeper into the center of the wheel. You have your education. You have your training. We get a little deeper. It's very hard to see our workplace motivators or our personal engagement. Then we have our intelligence. And then in the core, the center of our performance is our emotional intelligence. It comes first. Remember, we said it's the first thing. So really studying EQ is giving us another piece of the puzzle. We do certification and training online for not only the emotional intelligence, we do it for the workplace motivators, we do it for the DISC. Those are also profiles that we use to measure performance. And there's a 4th one, we also do the personal skills. There's a measurement for that as well. So now, what is the application? How could I use an EQ report? So really, you can think about how you think you're doing on those 5 factors. How are you on a scale of 1 to 10 in self-awareness, in self-regulation, in motivation, in empathy, in social skills? Well, the report will tell you. And how can you use that information? Well, as I found in my coaching, like I said, working in leadership, this is where a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of the executive team, a lot of the management team could really benefit in their leadership development programs and their coaching programs that they're working on their EQ. Like I said, it's about 90% of performance issues are coming from an EQ problem. Also, we have seen that sales increase when EQ increases. If you think back to that model, if you become more self-aware, if you become better at self-regulating, if you're more intrinsically motivated, if you really can show empathy, that is going to increase your social skills. And when social skills increase, sales increase. It's a documented fact. Now remember what I said, we can't use the EQ profile in selection per se, but we can use scenarios. We can come up with behavioral interviewing questions that gets to kind of the core of some of these 5 factors. But we suggest that you do place the EQ profile in the onboarding process. So after they're hired, run the profile, see where they're at, and right away that should lead to whether they need additional coaching, additional support in some key EQ areas to get them up and running. Also, another solution for EQ is in conflict management. A lot of the time, the conflict is coming from low EQ. Team development, that's where we effectively can use training. We've done many training sessions and off-site meetings for the leadership teams. That's a place where it can be used. And also, EQ goals have to be tied back to performance. So if we want to see an increase in EQ in our teams, well, we've got to tie it back to what's getting measured, and that's the performance evaluation. Okay, I have a couple more resources that I'd like to mention, and then kind of wrap up with some, give you a minute to go through some of your handout questions, write some notes, and then I think we're going to be taking some questions. So here's some additional resources. I'm going to put up the, for those of you that are taking notes, you can be thinking about these questions as well. So I mentioned a great video is that marshmallow experiment. It really kind of frames what we're talking about here in EQ. Also, there's a lot of YouTube videos. So pull up Bill George on EQ. He's got a very good video. He also has one on leadership and EQ. I mentioned Daniel Goleman. You know, he wrote the first book, but he's written many after, Working with Emotional Intelligence, Focus, The Power of Emotional Intelligence and Leadership. They're all good books. On YouTube, he's got a great intro to EQ. He's got audios you can listen to. There's a YouTube video on how to boost your EQ. Also go over to bigthink.com. They have some good videos. And on our own website, if you go to WellRun, on our EQ page, we have some EQ tips. We have an article that's a great one called Controlling Emotions in the Workplace that was written by a TTI staff person. If you do decide to run your profile, we have a free debrief guide on our website that can help walk you through it. And also I mentioned earlier, if you were interested in the validation study, the technical report, that's under our resources as well. And one more book, The Emotional Intelligence 2.0. That is also another book that I would recommend on EQ as well. Okay, so before I move to questions, let's make sure that you're walking away with 3 to 5 insights from today. You know, why know EQ? Hopefully now you understand the importance of knowing your EQ, knowing the EQ of your team. What will be some benefits of increasing your EQ? Hopefully those things like, you know, higher collaboration, teamwork, increased sales. Hopefully those are some motivating reasons. How can I use my EQ? We've just talked about some business solutions. How can I increase my EQ? Well, like I said, increasing it has to be a development strategy. It's not going to happen by listening to this webinar. You're going to have to really, you know, dive into it. You're going to need to start with your self-awareness. You're going to have to start with, first of all, probably a profile to know how is your EQ doing. What I know from coaching, you know, hundreds of people on their EQ, usually of the 5 factors, people have, you know, 2 that they're doing pretty good in. And then they have 1, 2, sometimes 3 that are rather low. Low meaning below average. So we start with the self-awareness, and then we move into the categories that they need to improve on. And how can you benefit from the EQ? Well, hopefully today's webinar, if you learned nothing else, you learned about what's underneath that iceberg and why do we need to study this. If you're looking for an increase of performance in your position, if you're looking to increase the effectiveness of your team, of your organization, of your executive team, EQ is really kind of where it's at. So with that said, why don't I move to some questions? I think we have questions coming in. Greg, do you want to?
Yep. Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate your information on emotional quotient, and we do have some questions that did come in during the seminar. But what maybe we need to bring up, you know, is how do we know what our emotional quotient score is? You know, and so we might want to just tell them a little bit about the assessment and then also we'll be providing that to everybody at a discount who wants to actually measure their emotional quotient.
Yes, it's a self-assessment. You take it online. It takes, 10 to 15 minutes. You get your results immediately. Like I said, it's highly validated. So it's as close as we can get to an accurate picture of what your EQ looks like. And it measures the 5 factors that we studied here today. So you're going to know your self-awareness score. You're going to know your self-regulation. Also, you're going to see what the national mean is. And that's important because that helps you gauge how am I doing compared to others. And, if let's say your self-regulation is low, and by the way, the national means, which is a little frightening, the national mean for self-regulation is the lowest. And that is validated in the U.S., and that kind of does speak a little bit to some of the issues we have going on in our country. It is, people are not very good at controlling themselves. And so I see a lot of, very average self-regulation scores, and that is the lowest of all the 5 national means. So you'll get a report. You'll know exactly where you're at on the 5 factors. They'll explain to you the 5 factors. They'll give you tips as to how you can improve those 5 factors with exercises to do. So, it could be a standalone. You could take it. You could go to our website, download that free debrief guide, and you'd have a lot of information to get started. So I would say that's the place to start, is with the profile. And then we can talk about certification a little later, because those would be for the people who really want to get into it.
Thanks, Jen. Here's a couple of questions. Where should I start, or at what level, with EQ profiles and training in my organization?
Yes. So what we have found is to start with the top. First of all, HR needs to be on board. So you got to get HR on board, and if you're on this call and you're HR, great. You're the place to start. And if you're not, well, then you want to get HR on board, and you really want to start with the executive team. What I will tell you is, like I said, I coach a lot of executives who do not have a high EQ. They may have a very high IQ, but their EQ may be lacking. But that's the place to start, because they're driving the culture of that organization. And if we can get the executive team to improve their EQ, we are going to see a domino effect of then the management team, the supervisory, and down to the line staff. And I will tell you, when I've looked at EQs in organizations, I see some line staff have higher EQs than some executives. So I start at the top when I talk about EQ.
Yeah. Well, how would you like to coach Donald Trump, Jennifer?
Well, I've said about Donald Trump for years, that guy needs coaching. The problem with the Donald is that he doesn't know he needs coaching. He's uncoachable. The problem is his self-awareness doesn't say he needs coaching. And what we see with the Donald, and we've got an article on our website about him, because we've looked at the behaviors, we looked at the motivators, we looked at the EQ, and he's a classic example of a high D who probably has low self-awareness, so he's not aware of how he comes across to others. But he's also got some low EQ factors, because if he was aware, he might change. And, so he's a great person to study of how do we correlate behaviors, and that's a point right there. Just because you're a high D, there is no direct correlation with EQ. So we can have a high D with high EQ, and we can have one with low EQ.
Right. Yeah, for those of you who don't know what a high D is, I know we have many people on the call who, use the DISC report. D stands for dominance, I stands for influence, that's your people skills, and S steadiness, C for compliance to rules and procedures, and everybody has either a high or low score in those 4 temperaments. And definitely not to be political, but Donald Trump is what you would call a stereotypical high D, low I individual. I have another question that just came in, Jen, and I don't know the answer to this one, but it says, are there studies that publish the geographic EQ based on, city, state, for example, for job searching purposes?
I have not seen a study yet that has been broken down to demographics. What's interesting, though, on a personal note, I have lived all over the country. So I currently live in Florida. I lived for many years in California. So I will tell you that what's probably, although it's not maybe an EQ measurement, I think the geographic cultural differences play into it. So what may be acceptable on the West Coast may not be acceptable on the East Coast, and we see that play out through EQ, but I don't know of any study that has been done on that. It's just kind of a hunch that I do see that there's differences.
Yeah, and agreeing with what you said earlier, with our experience with senior level people, we do find that many of them, or a larger percentage of them, do have low self-awareness, and people skills sometimes is lacking. So the good news is you can learn to improve that and relate better to other people, including your own family members. How about this question, Jen? Do women have higher EQ than men?
That has been measured, and I found that fascinating. And I read that study. Believe it or not, the overall average score is the same. But here's the difference. The individual scores are different. So say, for example, women have a higher overall score on empathy than men. But men overall have a higher score on motivation. So even though it came out the same, the factors were different.
Well, it just takes both for a successful organization. And so those are the questions I have at this point. We want to talk to you at the end of this webinar a little bit about how you can measure your own emotional quotient. As Jennifer said, there is an online assessment that we provide people, and it takes 15 minutes to take the report, and then you get I don't know, it's like a 19 page report that measures your 5 factors, from low to high. And also we have for those of you on the call who are more practitioners who want to be certified in emotional quotient, be able to administer the assessment at a more, I would say, not quite clinical level. We provide that certification, and there's a class beginning early March that Jennifer will be providing. It's 4 90-minute sessions. It's like the DISC training that I provide. And if you want to know more about any of the assessments or see samples of the reports, you can look at my website or Jennifer's website, and we can provide samples of those. And the special deal I'm going to provide to everybody today is, well, the normal price for the emotional quotient profile is $85, and we're giving everybody on the call today $20 off that, so it would be $65. Also, we're giving you a $150 discount off the certification training. If that's something you would like to know more about, please email me at greg@chartcourse.com, and we'll probably be sending out some information on that through email for those of you who are on the class today. So before we conclude, anything else we need to talk about, Jennifer?
No, I'd just like to say that, those are great offers, and I think that's a very small investment for you to make to figure out what your EQ is and kind of what you need to do about it. Because we all, myself included, have, at least one area that I need to focus on So I think that's a really great discount that you're offering, Greg. And I think also those who really want to dive into EQ, those who really want to deliver the EQ, then I would look at the certification. It's great timing because it's starting in a couple of weeks. And what I do is I really take everybody through it step by step. And when they finish that certification and they do take an exam, they're certified. They're ready to go out into their organization and teach that. Also, we give them the PowerPoint so they can have their own trainings based off of that. And they're really ready to interpret other people's profiles and to deliver a very powerful EQ program. And the feedback that we've gotten so far on that, it's very good. So those of you who are interested in getting deeper into the EQ, I mean, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I know there's a few of you asking you how to, where's the website for the EQ assessment. We'll email everybody where you can find that information. And then if you're interested in purchasing one for yourself or for your team or staff, we can set that up as well offline. So thanks for all those questions and the interest level in this this assessment and this process. So if there's nothing else today, I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. There will be a recording as well for those of you who may have had technical issues. And Jennifer, I appreciate your time today, and stay tuned for our next webinar next month, which we'll be announcing in the Navigator newsletter. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon, and keep charting your course.